everybody, welcome today to our virtual boardroom. How do you show up? Why emotional intelligence matters. It's being facilitated today by HR Recruit and Stephen Brunt. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Stephen, who will introduce himself shortly. Stephen is going to demonstrate how the way we show up is critical to success in anything people related. If you do have any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility, and we've allowed time at the end to go through them in a Q&A session. I'm now going to hand you over to Stephen, who will introduce himself and start the session. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Jo. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for taking some time. Sorry, technical error. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy days to come along and listen to me talking about emotional intelligence. So today's session is going to be a little bit interactive. So you're going to need paper and pen to hand. And unusually, you're going to need your mobile phone as well. We're not going to be doing anything too much with it, but we're going to be using an interactive polling tool. So you're going to need your mobile phone to be able to scan a QR code as we go through the session. So really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy days to come along. So let me just share my screen with you and get the session started. Okay, excellent. So you folks can all see my screen slides there.
Yeah, can see that, Stephen.
Wonderful. Right, great stuff. So emotional intelligence. How do we show up, and why our emotions matter? That's the subject for today's session. So as I said, welcome along. Really pleased to be here to be able to talk to you a little bit about this topic. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I use a lot in my world. So as Jo said, my name is Stephen Brunt. I have worked in learning development for nigh on 20 years, I guess, coming up to somewhere near that. And a lot of my work focuses around workplace relationships. So whether that's helping leaders improve the engagement with their individual teams, whether that's improving leadership through leadership development programs, coaching, one-to-one leadership coaching, team development, and facilitation of kind of strategic planning days, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of my work is using emotional intelligence and other tools to help people understand and assess their levels of awareness of themselves and other people. So this is something that I really care about, something I'm really passionate about. And what I want to try and do from today is make it an interactive session, and that you can take something away from it from an individual basis, but also potentially see how something like emotional intelligence can be used across your teams, with your clients, with your stakeholders, within your own businesses. And the whole premise around emotional intelligence, the fundamental element of it is around self-awareness. And having good levels of self-awareness is key to so many different areas of our lives, from our working backgrounds, from our working lives, through to understanding a little bit more about our own well-being and resilience, and how we respond to certain factors around stress, etc. So emotional intelligence is a big topic. One of the things that we are going to do from today, after the end of the session, Jo is going to pick a name at random from all of you, from the list of people who've attended today, and one of you lucky folks is going to be in the opportunity to receive an emotional intelligence assessment and one-to-one debrief and coaching session with me as a thank you for taking some time out of your day to come along to the session. So Jo will draw the name after the session today, and we'll contact you directly. You can either use that session for yourself, or if you want to gift it to a colleague or somebody else, then that's absolutely fine as well. But one of you will have the opportunity to take that offer up after today's session. So as I said, grab a paper and pen, make sure you've got something handy, because we're going to do some activities that will require that. And again, as I said, have your phone, have it on silent as usual, don't let it distract you, but have it close to hand. And appreciate you've probably all got a lot on your plates, you're very busy people. But I'd like you to be a little bit selfish with your time for the next 40-45 minutes. Be present, participate, make some notes, ask some questions. and get involved in the session. I want to start with making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what emotional intelligence is, and understand kind of where I'm coming from when I talk about it. There's a huge amount of research out there that has found emotional intelligence and that ability to handle our feelings and emotions rather than our IQ can determine how successful and we can be in our working lives and in our general lives. And our places of work, where we would traditionally find huge amounts of human connection, have become more and more remote. The way that we interact with our colleagues and customers has changed, particularly over the last sort of 2-3 years. So our adaptability to change, our personal resilience levels have been tested more than ever before. So being aware of how we are feeling, how those feelings and emotions impact other people, how other people are feeling, is becoming more and more critical to success in our world, both from a working context and also a personal context. And there's huge amounts of research that Daniel Goleman has done, particularly around that successful leaders, really successful leaders, it's not enough to be book smart. Your IQ is not enough. That this level of emotional intelligence is as critical, if not more critical, in order to be successful, because your emotions and the way that you show up can have such a huge impact on those people around you, whether it's the people that you're leading or people that your colleagues or stakeholders or customers. But if we look at emotional intelligence as a kind of starting point, it was popularized by Daniel Goleman. He brought it to a wider audience in the 1990s. And in Goleman's model, he explains there's those 4 basic dimensions with his approach to emotional intelligence. And that first element is self-awareness, that ability to understand what we feel, to be connected to our values, to be connected what's important to us, to be aware of how we're feeling. That is the most critical element to emotional intelligence. And if you think of other psychometric tools like insights discovery, Myers-Briggs, any of those types of tools, they all help with self-awareness. If you don't have that, you're on hiding to nothing. This is the most critical part of understanding who we are, is what's important to us, how are we showing up, how are we actually feeling. The second aspect that then leads on to nicely to that self-management piece, that ability to orient ourselves towards our goal, to recover from setbacks, to manage stress, to control the way that we're feeling, to adapt our behavior, to use our initiative, which then leads nicely into that third element, which is that social awareness and empathy. So that's that ability to understand how other people are feeling, to understand how our emotions and our feelings are showing up externally and how they're impacting other people, and how we can connect to others with an empathetic approach. And then I guess the golden nugget to all of those is that ability, that relationship management, that ability to relate, communicate, to influence, to change, to build connections, to collaborate, to connect with other people. So that's essentially, in a real, very small nutshell, that's essentially what emotional intelligence is. And I really like this quote from Mayer and Salovey, who they developed an emotional intelligence assessment tool and have done equally a huge amount of research. But that ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate amongst them and use the information to guide our own thinking. And actually, I really like this. It's about making intelligent responses to negative feelings. So there's no such thing as a bad emotion. All our emotions serve a purpose. If you feel hunger, it's because you need to eat. If you are feeling anger or fear, it's likely your brain is trying to protect you from some kind of perceived threat. So all of our emotions serve a purpose. It's how we respond to them, particularly the more negative or less positive emotions, that generally cause us a problem. And we experience a whole myriad of emotions through the day, and it can be sometimes quite difficult to tap into that emotional vocabulary of just exactly what we're feeling. And because emotional intelligence is such a fundamental part of leadership and organizational success, it becomes critical that we start to improve that kind of self-awareness. And I want to do an activity straight off, just to sort of tap into just how aware are we of how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis. So folks, if you can grab your mobile phones for me and scan the QR code that you see on the screen, and that should take you into Slido polling screen or tool. If you can't access it through the QR code for whatever reason, then if you go to slido.com and input that hashtag pin number, that will allow you into the session, into the Slido. And I'm going to launch the first poll.
Stephen, sorry, can I just interrupt? Caroline's just asked a question, said that she might be jumping the gun, but what happens if EI is put under stress? Can this work against a person?
Yeah, I mean, the key bit with emotional intelligence around the self-awareness is understanding how we do respond in stressful situations. So your emotional intelligence won't be stressed. The more emotionally intelligent you are, the more aware you are of what your stress triggers are and how you can respond to those more effectively. So EI is just a kind of general term for how aware we are of how we are feeling. The more aware you are of yourself, the better you are at being able to handle stressful situations. Ultimately, what we want to create in ourselves is that emotional agility. So to recognize that the things that trigger our stress response, and then what do we do? How do we effectively respond to that to ensure that we don't end up at burnout? Because if we keep allowing ourselves, or we don't respond effectively to those stress triggers, eventually we end up, worst case scenario, we can end up in burnout, if that makes sense. Great question, though. Thank you. So I can already see that loads of you are kind of responding to this. So let me just share what's coming up on the Slido poll. So let me just stop sharing that screen and share this other one. So yeah, what I want to try and tap into, folks, is what is it? How many emotions and feelings can you recall experiencing in the last 24 hours? So from 12:30 yesterday lunchtime through to 12:30 today, how have you been feeling? What emotions you've been feeling? So I'm just going to give you 60 seconds initially to kind of put some responses up there. And we're going to take a look at those, but we can see from the screen that we've got frustration, stress, anger, tiredness. We have got some happy people, which is good. You know, this is obviously very contextual. If you've had a particularly rotten day yesterday, maybe you got stuck in traffic because of the snow, maybe you had a couple of bad meetings, maybe just some things at home went badly, you're going to remember more negative emotions than you are positive. And interestingly, we're actually biologically equipped to recall more of the negative emotion than we are positive. So we will often default to that because that's just the way that we're made. And a lot of that is around, again, if you think about how our brain is wired, a lot of those negative things are there our brain is trying to protect us from some perceived threat. Now, the threat that you may have perceived might have been an email from your boss to say at 5 o'clock saying, can you see me first thing tomorrow morning? Immediately, it makes your hackles go up. But our brain responds the same way to that perceived threat than it would have done thousands of years ago if a wolf, came into your village when you were living with your tribe, So our brain is there to protect us. So hunger, miserable, lost, empowered. So there's some really powerful words, mild annoyance. And then I think I saw full-on annoyance as well, which is not unusual. Panic, unfairness. I'll just leave that running for a few more seconds. But you can see we've got a whole myriad of emotions here. We've got a whole collection of different words: happiness, worry, stress, joy, flustered, some really good descriptors. And one of the things that we need to be better at is recognizing just, what emotions we are experiencing. It can be really difficult to tap in, particularly if you're in the grip of something bad or negative. It can be very difficult to tap into that emotional vocabulary. If you really struggle to kind of think, on a day-by-day basis, reflecting on how you're feeling, if you really struggle to tap into those emotional dictionary, most of our emotions stem from just 4 basic ones, from 4 core emotions. And we either are sad, mad, glad, or scared. If you think about when we're sad, it's we're upset, we're unhappy. If we're mad, it's that anger, it's that fear. If it's glad, that can be linked to kind of happiness. Sad, mad, glad, scared, fear. Couldn't remember the other one. So if you find it difficult to really tap into some of those other words, you can start off with just those four. Am I sad, mad, glad, or scared? Then you can start to think about, there are over 1,000 words in the English dictionary that help us describe feelings and emotions. So being able to identify those can be really, really important. And the reason that that's really important, I'm going to kind of talk through next. So I'm going to leave that poll running, but I'm just going to switch my screens again. So bear with me 1 second. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that as well. There's some really interesting emotion coming up there. And again, a lot of it I appreciate will be really contextual. If you've had a particularly rotten day, you're going to recall those more negative emotions. Let's get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. So why is it important that we kind of understand how we've been feeling? Well, our emotions actually have a big impact in three main areas of our life. So this is why it's important we should pay attention to them. So the first way our emotions influence us is they influence the way that we think and the decisions that we make. If you think about the times where you've made a decision when you're upset or you're angry or you're fearful or something like that, generally it may not be the most constructive decision that you've ever made. So when we're operating from a place of fear, from that kind of our brain protecting ourselves, sometimes our decisions aren't particularly expansive. We're very narrow-minded. The second way that it influences us, it defines the way that we behave. So if you think about how we read emotion with other people and how our own emotions show up, we pick up our emotions come out in our body language, our tone of voice, they show up in our facial expressions. So our emotions influence the actual physical behavior that other people see in us. And then finally, the way that we feel also influences the way that we perform. So there's been a lot of research around organizations where people feel valued, where people feel cared for, consulted, informed, understood, people are engaged in the work that they do. Those organizations significantly outperform people and organizations where people are feeling worried, concerned, anxious, stressed, etc. So there is that real significant link between the way that we feel, the way that we think, the way we behave, and the decisions that we make and the way that we perform. And that's why it's really important that we're aware of how we're feeling. And actually we help our teams understand, and we start to tap into the emotional vocabulary around our teams. So what does emotional intelligence actually look like in action then? So great, Steve. Yeah, we get the theory, we understand what Daniel Goleman was talking about. We understand why it's important to tap into this stuff, but what does it actually look like? I'd like you to grab your piece of paper and pen now, please, if you wouldn't mind. And with your piece of paper, doesn't need to be a big piece, it could be a little post-it note, but I just want you to divide it into two columns. So draw a line down the middle, and divide that into two columns. And on the top of the left column, I want you to think about the best manager, leader, boss, whatever word you want to use, the best boss you've ever had. If it's not necessarily someone from work, it might be someone who's been a mentor to you, maybe a coach, maybe a university or college lecturer, maybe a sports coach, something like that, but someone that you've worked with that you just, that you would want to be with that person again. But think about the best boss you've ever had, someone who's had an impact or some kind of leadership influence over you. And I want you to put their name or their initials at the top of that piece of paper. What I'm then going to do, folks, now you've done that, is I am going to flash up six statements. And using the scoring key at the bottom of the slide, I want you to rate to what extent that person demonstrated this particular behavior that's going to show up on screen. So, for example, the first one is going to be, when it works, is to what extent did this individual demonstrate their awareness of their mood and emotion? Score them a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 based on the scoring key that's at the bottom of that, the scoring legend that's at the bottom of the slide there. Because it might be you actually work with that person still now, so you might be able to score them as you are. It might be someone you've worked with a number of years ago. But to what extent do they demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotion? The second behavior we're looking to assess is to what extent did that person make other people feel appreciated? Was it significantly less than other people? other managers that you've worked for? Was it significantly more than other managers that you've worked for, or other people? Was it somewhere in between? So again, score a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The third element we're going to look at is how often did that person, or does that person, how open are they about mistakes that they've made? So not mistakes that other people have made, but how open and honest are they about mistakes that they have made? Again, score them a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. To what extent did this individual make ethical decisions? And when I say ethical decisions, I'm talking about decisions that potentially are kind of driven by morals and values, that are in alignment with organizational context, that are in alignment with how they particularly show up, with what's important to them. So how often did they make what you would think would be an ethical decision? Thinking again, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. How well, or to what extent, did that person manage their emotions in difficult situations? So how good were they at managing in a difficult situation? How good they were managing their emotional kind of spillage, their emotional leakage? Again, thinking about that same scoring. And the final question, the final statement, how well or to what extent did that person recognize other people's hard work and achievements? So once you've scored those 6 statements, each of those out of 5, just total up what you've scored for all 6 statements. So it should be out of 30. What was the overall score across those 6 statements? And just write that score underneath those numbers you've written there. Fabulous, thank you. The next thing I want you to think about, we're still thinking about this best boss, this manager, this leader, this mentor, whoever it is that we've got in mind. I want you to think about, what was it like to be around that person? How did they make you feel? What was it like when you knew you were going to be in a room with that person? How did they make you feel? I just want you to write down 3 words of how that person made you feel, or makes you feel, because you might be lucky enough to still work with that individual. So how did they make you feel? Just 3 words. And then finally, the last thing I want us to do with this individual is think about, you've now got an opportunity to work with this person again, if you don't already, on a challenging project, something that's going to be really difficult. It's going to be a bit of tension. It's going to be really hard work. How motivated are you going to be to work with this individual again on this particularly challenging piece of work? And just score 1 through 10. 1, 2, 3 is, yeah, no way. 8, 9, or 10 is, yes, please, sign me up, let's get going. And 4 to 7, somewhere in the middle, is a bit of a meh. I wouldn't mind, but maybe not too bothered. So where would you score them? How motivated are you going to be to work with this individual again on a particularly challenging piece of work? Okay. So we're going to continue with this activity, but now I want you to think about perhaps someone who hasn't made a particularly positive influence on your working life. So maybe the worst manager, boss, leader that you've ever worked with. And again, it may not be someone at work. It may be someone else who has had an influence over you from a leadership kind of perspective, whether that's that uni lecturer or coach or teacher, mentor, whatever it might be. But thinking about an individual who, perhaps hasn't landed as well as the other. And I just want you to write their name or their initials on the top of the right-hand column of that piece of paper you've got there in front of you. And we're basically going to go through the same activity. So I want you to score this individual. We're going to use the same 6 behavioural statements, the same 6 behavioural competencies, and we're going to assess this person using the same scoring legend. So to what extent did or does this person demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotion? Again, is it significantly less than other people through to significantly more than other people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How often did or does this person, make other people feel appreciated? So how well did they do that? How well did they, or to what extent did they demonstrate that appreciation for other people and what they were bringing to the party? How open and honest was this individual about mistakes that they had made? So to what extent did that person how open are they about the mistakes that they have personally made? Were they significantly less than others, less than about typical of most other people, or something more? To what extent did this person make ethical decisions? So to what extent did or does this person make ethical decisions basing on the same scoring legend? How well did this individual manage their emotions effectively in difficult situations? So we're talking about that, what was their emotional leakage like? How well did they manage their emotions in challenging and difficult scenarios and situations? And then finally, how well did this person, to what extent did they recognize other people's hard work and achievements? Is this something they did less than, about typical, or more than other people? And as we did with the other one, I just want you to tot up the total score and just write that on your piece of paper. And again, it should be out of 30. Excuse me. Okay. So the next thing then, what was it like to be around this person? So when you knew you were going to be in a room with this individual, what were the overarching emotions or feelings that came up? Again, I'd like you to write down 3 words if you can muster up 3. You might have more. You might need to kind of tally it in. But what was it like to be around that person? How did this person make you feel when you had to be around them, when you worked with them, when you were in a meeting with them, whatever it was? What were the overarching emotions and feelings that came up? And if you can write down 3 things here for this individual. And then finally, as we did with the other person, if you had an opportunity to work with them on a challenging project, it's going to be hard work, it's going to be testing, going to be some creative conflict. How motivated will you be? If you had an opportunity to do that, how motivated would you be to work on that piece of work with this individual again? Again, thinking about a 1 through to 10. Fabulous. Okay, folks, again, if you grab your phone, scan if it's not still open, you might have the web browser still open. Let's go back to Slido, scan the QR code, go back to the web page. Hopefully it's left it open for you. And let's have a look at how we've captured some of those scores. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint for a second. And oops. Wrong button, close that, share screen. There we go. So that was our word cloud from our first poll. So let's move on to the next one. So looking at let's have a look at our best boss first. Let's have a look at this individual that we said is the best boss that we've ever had. What did you score them out of their out of 30? What have you scored them in terms of those emotionally intelligent leadership behaviours that we're basically assessing? So we got lots of high 20s, low 20. We've got 30. Excellent. 23, 22, 24, 28. Oh, marvelous. So, yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, what we tend to see when we do this activity is those best bosses tend to score north of 18, 19, 20 and above. What we're doing, this activity, is we're assessing somebody's emotionally intelligent leadership behavior. So what we've basically taken is 6 competencies around a certain element of emotional intelligence. And we've said, how well is this person aware of what they're doing? How are they actually showing up? And we've done a very simple assessment on those 6 emotionally intelligent leadership behaviors. And what we've seen with the best boss is, and generally what we always see, is that person shows up in a way that makes us feel valued. They recognize the work that we do. They're aware of how their emotions will impact other people. They make ethical decisions. They give feedback. They're supportive. So it's not a surprise to find that we've got lots of really high scores, up 30s. I think the lowest might have been 20, 23. 22. So yeah, unsurprisingly, our best boss shows up in an emotionally intelligent way. They're good at demonstrating emotionally intelligent leadership behavior. So how do they make you feel then? If you want to type in your 3 words, how do they make you feel? What was it like to be around them? If you knew you were going to be in a room, if you're in a meeting with this individual, if you knew you're going to spend time with this person, how do they make you feel? Trusted, yeah, nice. Proud, valued, supported, happy. Oh, look, that valued is becoming a big word. The more people who put valued in, the bigger that word obviously gets. Proud, relaxed, appreciated, included, progressive, nice. Okay, so we've got someone said they make me feel anxious and intimidated, but something else. Heard, supported, encouraged, fun, proud, positive, energized. That's a great word. That's really powerful, isn't it? Confident, supported, positive, motivated, valued. So valued, appreciated, supported are coming up as the biggest, the most common ones. And again, you know, part of the tribe, I like that. Absolutely. They create some kind of atmosphere, don't they? Create some kind of, great leaders create followers. You know, leaders are about creating some kind of fellowship, so they can create people who create an environment where you want to follow that individual, that you know, you'd almost do anything for them because they make you feel safe, valued, appreciated, supported. Brilliant. So then the next question I asked, come on, mouse, work, was how motivated are you going to be to work with this individual again? So it's a really challenging project, really hard piece of work. Bearing in mind how they make you feel, how motivated are you going to be to want to work with this individual again? Yeah, not a surprise. 7, 8, 9, 10. It's sometimes it's almost a no-brainer, isn't it? It's like, absolutely, yeah. Why? Because of the way that they made me feel, because of the way that they managed me, the way that they led me, because they made me feel valued, trusted, etc., etc., etc. So 8s, 9s, 10s, 7s. Lots of real motivation to want to work with this individual again, which again is not surprising. Okay. What we quite often see as well when we do this activity, we might delve into, well, how long did you work with this person? And often the relationship between us and these types of people is often a longer term relationship. We want to work for these people, you know, for longer periods of time than those who might not quite be on the same page. Okay, amazing. Thank you, folks. So we've now seen kind of our best boss. How does what they create in us, the kind of emotions that they create in us, the feelings that they generate in us by how they make us feel, and whether we're going to be motivated to work with them again. So let me move on to the next poll. Let's have a look at this other person then, this other individual. What do we score this person? What do we score this worst boss? So 9, 12, 11, 14, 6, 11, 12, 9, okay, dipping low. Yeah. 16, 11, 11. Yeah, so we've got a lot of low scores, unsurprisingly. Again, usually when we do this activity, tend to see kind of 12, 13 and lower. Sometimes I have seen slightly higher scores because there were some things that people recognized in that individual that they did take away as positive, but generally speaking, yeah, the highest score I think we've got on here is a 15. We've got 14 there, a couple of 14s, a couple of 15s, 12. So yes, unsurprisingly, they are not showing up in a way that demonstrates emotionally intelligent leadership behaviors. Same assessment, same characteristics, the same competencies that we're measuring, but these people are showing up in a way that doesn't demonstrate emotionally intelligent leadership behavior. Now, why is that? You know, they're the same. Is it because they have no self-awareness? And that often is the case. Is it that they have a level of self-awareness, but then just don't have the skill to be able to flex their behavior to meet the needs of other people? That's a possibility. The other really scary possibility is that they're aware and then they don't care how they show up to other people. And that certainly does exist. And I've encountered people like that. So, we need to really think about, well, if people don't have the skill to flex that ability, people can't change the way they behave unless they get the feedback in the first place. And then we've got to be able to support and coach and develop and lead those individuals to be able to help them to flex their behavioral style in a way that doesn't make other people feel the way that you're going to tell me now. So how did this individual make you feel when you knew you were going to be around them? How did they make you feel? That was not a good manager technically or otherwise. Well, yeah, absolutely, Elaine. That's an interesting comment. And what I often find, and it's not always the case, and I haven't done an official research study on this, but what I often see are people who are very technically gifted. So they might be at the top of their game in terms of knowledge, experience. Technically, they know everything there is to know about their industry, about their world, about what is. It's often that those people don't have the emotional intelligence that goes with the IQ. They don't have the EQ that matches the IQ. And it's not because that they don't care, it's that their world they often work in a world where the technical stuff is the most important. But as they climb the corporate ladder, what comes with that is responsibility for other people. And then they don't get given the support or development to develop those people bits, those people skills, that emotional intelligence that matches up with the IQ. And so, it's incumbent on us as leaders, as organizations, as development professionals, that we kind of help up people with this stuff and give them the support and skills in order to be able to manage and show up in a way that doesn't make people feel like this. But yeah, anxiety, stress, micromanagement, anger, demotivation, there's lack of the trust. So we've got not trusted, untrusting, unworthy, no management skills, fearful. Wow, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Bullied. I'm not surprised that that's there. It always makes me really angry when I see that, because it just shouldn't happen. But I know it does. Gets to our confidence. I saw an interesting article about gaslighting yesterday. How people are gaslighted at work. They have managers that undermine their value, that undermine their performance, that they make comments about the fact that they're not worthy enough. Yeah, so we are talking. What we're looking at here is this is how emotional intelligence in action. So when someone doesn't show up in a way where they are aware of how their behavior impacts others, this is how they make people feel. And if they made you feel like this, multiply that by 10, 20, 30 people, however many people this individual might come into contact with. Because it's likely that this individual, if they were your manager, it's not just their team that they're influencing, like in this way, it's going to be other stakeholders. It might even be clients and customers that they have no idea how their behavior impacts other people. And the way that they show up in this case is going to disengage people. Thank you very much for doing that. I really appreciate it. Sometimes it's not, I don't want to bring up any trauma responses in anyone and dipping into the past of people that work. And I kind of hope that you don't work with some of these people now, but I suspect that it might actually be the case that you can think of people you have worked with recently or even do now that might kind of fall into this camp. So, I don't think it's going to be any great surprise, but how motivated are you going to be to work with this individual again? Oh, Susie, that's an interesting question. Are we made to feel, or do we consciously choose to feel? Ooh, deep. We are biologically equipped to feel. Some of the emotion will be unconscious. The unconscious emotion might come first, but then a conscious thought will come. And we're going to dip into the neuroscience in a little while. So you can't choose the emotion that comes up. Your brain basically does that for you. And I don't want to steal my own thunder, but we are going to look at that in a sec, just how our brain responds to these. So it is the emotion and the feeling is there, and it's there because our brain needs to keep us safe. How much of this is due to social pressure? That's an interesting one, Caroline. I think there is an element, certainly, of this social pressure influences this. If a leader is working in an environment that doesn't encourage them to be vulnerable, to tap into that positivity, then they're likely to show up in a more negative way. So, if we look at if any of you attended the psychological safety session that I know Joe and the team ran recently, there is a huge link, massive link between emotional intelligence and psychological safety. You need that level of self-awareness and understanding how you show up in order to create an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes, that they can question the status quo, that you can, as a leader, that you can create an environment where people feel safe and it's okay to be vulnerable. If you haven't got good levels of emotional intelligence, it's going to be a real struggle to create an environment where people feel psychologically safe. Amazing. Thank you ever so much. As I was rabbiting on, we got 1s, 3s, and -10. I don't think anyone's ever put a minus before, but why should I be surprised? 0s, 4. I think the highest score there is a 4, maybe there's a 5. Yeah. So we're completely not motivated. We don't want to have anything to do with this individual if we absolutely don't have to. Amazing. Thank you for doing that. Let me stop sharing those polls. What I will do, I will consolidate some of that into a slides, and I can send those to Jo when she shares the slide deck. I'll pop the word clouds in there because they're really powerful. They're really powerful because that's actually how people make us. Those people have made us feel. So let me get back into my. Come on, mouse. What are you doing? Let me get back into my PowerPoint and let's share that. And we're just coming through to the last few. And I want to kind of pick up on the kind of emotional, the neuroscience part of it in a second. But I do appreciate you getting involved in that and sharing your experiences, because it's not always easy to kind of start to dip into that sort of stuff and be really honest. But when we look at the scores, if we look at those, just the numbers for the good boss versus the bad boss and how those people have made us feel, whether we're going to be motivated to work with that individual again, we can see that the way that people make us feel has a direct impact on the quality of that relationship. Most people don't get up in the morning and set out to make others feel stressed and angry, but they either have little or very little or no awareness of how their behavior is impacting other people. So by improving our emotional intelligence, by developing that self-awareness, we can improve that, and we can create an environment where people feel psychologically safe and more engaged in the work that we do. And this quote from Maya Angelou is absolutely hits the nail on the head. People will always, you may not remember specific things that those individuals said to you, you might do, but the likelihood is you might not remember most specifics, but you've certainly remembered how they've made you feel, haven't you? So if we think about how our brain actually works, then what's going on? So picking up on the question in the chat around, do we consciously or unconsciously feel? When an event happens, when something happens, some kind of stimulus, our brain effectively reacts in one of two ways. The first thing that does, that the stimulus is examined by the guard dog in our brain, which is the amygdala part of the brain, which is the bit that if you were to stick a pen in your eye and one in your ear, where they intersect is that kind of deep rooted part of the brain where the amygdala sits, the guard dog, the fear, the control center. That part of the brain is basically there to keep you safe. That amygdala has two labels for that stimulus, that event that's happened. It's either positive or negative. Does it want you to experience more of that? I.e., is it a reward? Is it something that's nice? Let's move you towards that thing. Or is it a danger or a threat? And let's move you away from that. So when we experience some kind of fear, some stress, some danger, some threat, when we're not valued, where we're made to feel anxious, angry, all those kinds of things, our amygdala is going to trigger that threat response in our brain. And it wants you to move away from that situation. It wants to keep you safe. The thinking part of the brain then helps you how you're going to decide how you're going to act, whether you're going to engage with that individual or not. Like I said, the brain isn't, that part of the brain isn't developed enough to realize the difference between that bad boss showing up, or an email that you get from that person that makes you feel stressed and angry, or whether it is a physical threat, it responds in exactly the same way. Now, when that amygdala has taken over, when you're in that fear, fight, or flight, when it's triggered, you lose the ability to access this prefrontal part of the brain, the part of the brain that makes sensible, logical decisions. So when we are feeling anxious, when we're feeling stressed, we lose that ability to connect with the creative part of our brain. So on the screen here, you can see these are slightly different word clouds, but you get the sense that they're very similar to what you've just come up with. So when we think about our bad boss, this is how they've made us feel. What's going to happen? We're not going to engage in the work that we do. We're going to close off to creativity. We might avoid contact with that person. We're not going to want to engage in creative conflict. We're not going to want to get involved. We want to keep our distance because our brain is basically going, warning, warning, danger, danger, Will Robinson. We need to keep you safe. That's a threat to us. You're going to lose access to this prefrontal cortex. And therefore, if you think about the Barbara Fredrickson upward spiral of positive emotion, that broaden and build theory, you're not going to be able to do that if your brain is constantly being triggered by someone who makes you feel these things. But conversely, when we've got someone who shows up in a way that makes us feel valued, happy, empowered, engaged, loved, cared for, etc., our brain wants more of that. That threat detection system is going to go, oh, yes, this is good. Let's move towards this person. Let's engage with our work. Let's connect. Let's build new relationships. Let's get creative. Let's problem solve. Let's try to work with different ways. Let's generate more of that feeling, that more emotion. So those decisions that we make, the way that we show up, the behavior that we choose to deploy, all of those are influenced by whether our brain is feeling some kind of reward or whether it's feeling some kind of threat, which is being generated by that individual. So when that bad boss walks into the room, it's triggered that emotional brain to recognize a threat or danger. Because of that pre-programming that we have to move away from danger and move towards reward, our inclination when we are with that bad boss is to mentally disengage, to protect ourselves, to hold back. We're not going to put ourselves out. We're not going to want to ask questions. We're not going to want to put our head above the parapet, as it were, because we don't want to be criticized or made to be feel stupid. That good boss has completely the opposite effect. Where our brain senses reward, we want to engage, we want to move towards that, we connect, we're open, because we want to feel more valued, happy, empowered. So when we're triggered into either of those mindset, it affects how we feel, the emotions we experience, the decisions we then make. And the interesting thing is that fear response part of your brain, that amygdala piece, is 6 times more powerful than this thinking logic part. I'm pointing here because it's behind your forehead. It's 6 times more powerful than the thinking logic part of the brain. So we have to consider the impact of emotional contagion. How does someone else's mood impact the rest of the team? And I'm sure when we did that activity a minute ago, you will have remembered how actually that individual, it wasn't just you that they made feel like that. It might have been a much wider audience. So that's a whistle stop. That's essentially how the brain is responding to those things. So we can see now, well, so our emotions can have a real impact on the decisions that we make, how we feel, how we engage in the work we do. When we think about individually, the behavior that we choose to show up with, how does that impact people? We can see that, and that's how it responds. That's how our brain responds. And that's how those organizations who have got more engaged people, who are more productive, there's less time off, there's more creativity. It's because there are high levels of emotional intelligence within their leadership cohort, within the people, within those organizations to generate those positive feelings. Okay, so I like to leave you with some little nuggets of information. So knowing some of this stuff now, what do you do individually? Hopefully you're not somebody else's bad boss. But so how do you develop your emotional intelligence? And I'm just going to leave you for each of those 6 competencies that we were assessing. they are linked to an element within the GNOS emotional intelligence assessment tool that I actually use. So the first one is around self-awareness. So how do you improve your self-awareness? One of the best things you can do is moving away from that list of stuff that you've got to do, your to-do list, and think about your to-be list. So who are you being whilst you're doing the things on your to-do list? Are you being empathetic? Are you being positive? Are you nurturing? Are you optimistic? Are you being upbeat? Think about setting your intentions for the day. Think about setting your intentions for every interaction that you're going to have with people through the day. How are you wanting to show up in line with your values? Regularly reflect on how you're feeling, thinking, reacting. Are those things serving you well, or are they limiting you? So really tap into some kind of reflective practice, whether it's an end of day journal entry or a kind of after each meeting. How have I shown up today that's been effective? The next one is around awareness of others. Get to know people around you, not just on a very, I know their name, I know where they live level. What's really important to them? What are their values and beliefs? What do they like to do? What motivates them? What do they find challenging at work? What do they want to be stretched? How do they like to be stretched? Our values and beliefs really shape the way that we interpret events, and consequently, they shape the way that we think, we feel, and react. What about authenticity then? So be open and vulnerable about the way you feel. I'm not talking about sitting around on beanbags having kind of therapy sessions with the whole team. There's an element, isn't there, where the superhero leader thing, the persona that we used to have, where leaders had to be very cold and stony-faced, doesn't exist anymore. Being vulnerable with people, being open about the way you're feeling, helps you connect with other people. And it also encourages them to be open and vulnerable with you. If you want to create an environment of psychological safety, this is one that's really, really important. It builds trust. And for those of you who know the Lencioni dysfunctions of a team model, the bottom element of that is trust. Without that, you have not got a high-functioning, high-performing team. So trust is a fundamental building block of high-performing teams. So think about how you can be open and vulnerable about the way you're feeling. Emotional reasoning. So this is about how do we use emotional information in our decision-making. So consult others in that decision-making process. Take time to communicate your decision, the reasons behind it, your thinking behind it, and involve others in that decision-making process, particularly where it's impacting their work. Self-management. It's about looking after yourself. Obvious stuff: exercise, eat well, limit email and call times, create boundaries for yourself. Work out for yourself what's okay and what's not okay in terms of those boundaries. It's not okay to work every evening, but it is okay to maybe have to work a couple of hours on a Sunday afternoon. Create those boundaries for yourself around what's okay and what's not okay. Think about those mind-body practices, mindfulness activities, being more present, coming out of autopilot, really managing how you're showing up. And finally, thinking about inspiring performance. Work on your coaching and mentoring skills. Invest time and effort into developing others. Foster that environment of learning and feedback. It's likely that your best bosses did this, and they've helped you to potentially get to the place that you are now. So think about how you can do that with other people. So those 6 questions that I asked you around the good boss, bad boss, they were the 6 competencies that we were assessing that individual against: self-awareness, awareness of others, authenticity, emotional reasoning, self-management, and inspiring performance. So I guess I want to kind of just sign off, and I know we've only got a couple of minutes for questions now, so apologies for overrunning slightly, but I want to leave you with this core truth of emotional intelligence. That the way that we show up, the behavior that we choose to deploy when we interact with people, has a massive impact. It determines the way that people feel, and the way that they feel determines the extent to which they're going to engage with us. And the amount that they engage is going to determine everything about the outcome of that relationship. Every day we get choice about the person we're going to be, how we're going to show up to our peers, to our subordinates, to our managers, to our friends and family. EI is about making intelligent choices and how we respond to those more negative emotions. So folks, be mindful about this. Don't be somebody else's bad boss. Thank you ever so much for taking part. Thank you for your time and your input and your questions and your chat. Here I am. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone's got any burning questions, Joe, if there's anything in the chat that we want to cover off, then now's an ideal opportunity to do that.
Recently, so Bobby's put around the distinction between the feeling and emotion, and he said that he thinks that's come from because the emotional brain could cause a feeling in the body before the thinking brain kicks in. Yeah,
that's a really good point, Bobby. I think I think the emotion, it's the emotion comes first. Because that's often the subconscious thing, and then the feeling is the conscious thing. So I think you're absolutely right. That's the way that I would understand it as well.
There isn't really anything else that we haven't covered, to be honest. If anyone's got any quick questions they want to just pop into the chat box.
Yeah, and just having a quick look. I think Caroline, I think I'm often too empathetic or empathic at times and find it really hard to distance myself. Yeah, so Caroline, I think there's something that you can do there. When you are someone who is naturally empathetic, we often give too much of ourselves, and I fall into this camp. If you've done insights discovery, someone who is predominantly on the earth green preferences within insights discovery we will often always put other people before ourselves. So for you, Caroline, it might be really important for you to kind of think about working on some boundaries around how you are going to distance yourself and how you are going to put yourself first sometimes, because otherwise, you know, we end up being a people pleaser and people take advantage inadvertently. So a really good point. Was there any other questions? There's a couple in the chat, but if there's anything else that anyone wants to pop in and ask, my details are on the screen there. Connect with me on LinkedIn, folks. So I do post stuff around EI and other bits and bobs on there fairly regularly, articles that I find that I think are worth a share. Follow me, let's connect, let's keep a relationship going. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day. I will be coming back, I think, on the 24th of April, is it, Joe?
25th, I was just going to mention that. Yeah, if anyone wants to come on to one of Stephen's other sessions with us, Leading Changes, I'll pop that into the email this afternoon.
Yeah, and so that's going to be all around the kind of psychology of change. So we're going to look at change from a human element. You know, what's the behavior and stuff that generates and drives change, rather than thinking of change as a process. So we're going to look at the behavior and the psychology around change. So love to see some of you again for that session. If not, it's been great to meet you all today. Thank you ever so much again. Really appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks very much, everyone. I will send out some correspondence as usual to everyone that's signed up, and there'll be some links on there to a post on LinkedIn. And if you want a copy of the handouts or recording, then let me know. We've got an event next week on Tuesday the 14th at 12:30, and that's handling dismissals due to long-term sickness absence. That's actually a webinar. Other than that, I'd just like to say thanks very much to everybody. I thought it was a fantastic session, really interesting, Stephen. So thanks very much for all your preparation for that. And thanks for everybody that's registered and joined us. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. All the best.